Welcome to Peacetime Story, your cozy space for calm and relaxation. Tonight's tale is here to help you unwind, let go of the day, and drift into peaceful rest. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Share it in the comments below, and let's see how far our story family reaches. And if you enjoyed gentle bedtime stories, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more peaceful nights. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's journey.
Lord Harrington died of heart failure in his study, but his gardener found monkshood crushed beneath the window. His parlor-maid saw a stranger fleeing with a bundle, and the librarian uncovered coded messages about midnight harvests at a derelict station house. Who silenced him? What was smuggled? And how did a vicar's courage finally unmask the killer hiding in plain sight?
Chapter 1. The Unlikely Gardener. The late September sun cast long, melancholic shadows across the manicured lawns of Harrington Hall, a sprawling pile of Victorian stone and Tudor brick that seemed to sigh under the weight of its own history. Miss Jane Marple, her frame swathed in sensible grey wool, her knitting bag tucked securely under one arm, paused at the crest of the gentle rise leading down to the house. She wasn't here for the annual autumn fete, though the scent of wood smoke and distant strains of a slightly off-key brass band suggested it was in full swing on the far side of the estate. She was here, rather inconveniently, because her dear friend, the formidable Lady Alicia Harrington, had suffered a nasty tumble and was now convalescing at Miss Marple's own cottage in St. Mary Mead. Lady Alicia, ever the organizer, had insisted Miss Marple represent her at the Hall's harvest luncheon, a duty the elderly spinster viewed with the same enthusiasm as a root canal. Yet, as she approached the grand oak front door, a subtle dissonance prickled at the edges of Miss Marple's perception. It wasn't the overt chaos of a crime scene, no flashing lights, no grim-faced officials, but a quieter, more profound disturbance. The air, usually thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax polish, and the faint, sweet perfume of Lady Alicia's favourite lilies, felt flat, stale, and beneath the carefully maintained facade of the Hall's exterior, a current of suppressed tension ran like an underground stream. Inside, the atmosphere was equally strained. The luncheon, served in the cavernous, oak-panelled dining room, was a muted affair. Lord Harrington, patriarch of the clan, a man whose presence usually dominated any room with a blend of bluff charm and autocratic authority, was conspicuously absent. His place at the head of the table remained empty, set with chilling precision. "Father's indisposed, I'm afraid," announced his nephew, Cedric Harrington, a young man whose expensive tweed jacket couldn't quite disguise the shiftiness in his eyes. He gestured vaguely towards the ceiling. "A touch of gout, or perhaps the roast goose disagreed with him last night. He's resting." Miss Marple offered a sympathetic murmur, her sharp gaze taking in the other occupants. Eleanor, Lord Harrington's daughter-in-law, widowed these past 3 years, picked listlessly at her food, her face pale and drawn. Her son, young Timothy, fidgeted nervously beside her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Groves, moved with a stiffness that spoke of shock rather than her usual brisk efficiency. Only the parlour-maid, Lucy, a girl with large, observant eyes and a tendency to fade into the woodwork, seemed to move with any semblance of normality, though Miss Marple noted the way Lucy's hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences. Cedric tried to inject some forced joviality, discussing the disappointing turnout for the fete, but it fell flat. Eleanor barely responded. Miss Marple, deploying her most harmless old lady persona, gently inquired after Lord Harrington's specific symptoms. "Oh, just fatigue," Miss Marple interjected quickly, her voice tight. "He's been working far too hard. The estate. Matters have been complex lately." She shot a meaningful glance at Cedric, who flushed and looked away. Complex matters indeed, Miss Marple thought, her fingers instinctively finding the cool wool of her knitting bag, and complex matters often lead to complex consequences. After a dessert of stewed apples and cream that tasted faintly of ashes, Miss Marple excused herself, citing a desire for a breath of fresh air before the long drive home. She didn't head towards the fate's distant noise, but instead wandered toward the quieter, more secluded parts of the garden bordering the west wing of the house, the wing that housed Lord Harrington's private study. It was here, standing on the gravel path that ran directly beneath the study's large lead-light window, that Miss Marple stopped dead. Her knitting bag slipped slightly in her grasp. The flower bed bordering the path was a wreck. It wasn't the untidiness of neglect. This was deliberate, violent disruption. Clumps of late-blooming asters and chrysanthemums were trampled, their vibrant petals bruised and muddy. Sturdy stems of lavender were snapped near the base. But it was the state of the soil beneath the window that truly caught her experienced eye. It wasn't just disturbed, it was scuffed. Deep, parallel gouges marred the dark earth, as if something heavy had been dragged across it, or perhaps someone had scrambled frantically, heels digging in. A few shards of pale, glazed pottery lay scattered amidst the carnage, remnants, Miss Marple guessed, of a window box that had met a sudden, violent end. She looked up. The study window was slightly ajar at the bottom, perhaps an inch or two. Not enough to see clearly, but enough to suggest it hadn't been closed properly. A faint, unpleasant odor, acrid and slightly sweet, like almonds left too long in the sun, drifted down to her. It was gone almost as soon as she registered it, carried away on the breeze. Miss Marple's mind, a finely tuned instrument for detecting the fractures in everyday life, began to whir. Lord Harrington's sudden indisposition, the strained silence at lunch, Eleanor's mention of complex matters, Cedric's shiftiness, and now this, clear evidence of a struggle, or at least a frantic exit, directly beneath the window of the room where the master of the house lay supposedly resting. The faint, unsettling scent, the broken pottery. This wasn't gout. This wasn't indigestion. This was something far more sinister. She needed to know what grew in that bed, what was in that window box, and she needed an expert. Her gaze swept the meticulously maintained, though currently neglected gardens. She needed the gardener. Finding Mr. Wilkins was easier than expected. He wasn't in his potting shed, a rack-shamble building overflowing with terracotta pots and twine, but rather kneeling by a rose-bed some distant away, his back to the hall, his shoulders slumped in a posture of profound dejection. He was a small, wiry man in his late 60s, with weathered skin, calloused hands, and thinning grey hair escaping from a worn cloth cap. He was meticulously deadheading a rosebush, his movements precise but lacking their usual vigour.
"Mr. Wilkins?" Miss Marple approached softly, not wishing to startle him. He looked up, his eyes a faded blue, clouded with grief. "Oh, Miss Marple, Lady Alicia's friend. Didn't expect to see you here today, what with, well, everything." His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "Indeed," Miss Marple said gently, "a dreadful shock about Lord Harrington. I was just at the luncheon. They said he was taken poorly." Mr. Wilkins snorted, a sound devoid of humour. "Taken poorly? Aye, that's one way of putting it. Found him this morning, cold as charity, right there in his chair by the fire." He gestured vaguely towards the west wing. "Doctor came, said it was his heart, gave up the ghost peaceful-like." "Peaceful?" He shook his head, turning back to the rosebush, his fingers tightening on the secateurs. "Doesn't feel peaceful, not one bit." Miss Marple's heart gave a sympathetic lurch. "I'm so terribly sorry, Mr. Wilkins. You worked for him a long time, didn't you?" 40 years, Miss Marple, since I was a lad. Knew every inch of this place, every plant, every weed. It wasn't always easy, mind you. Demanding, particular, but fair, mostly." He fell silent, his gaze distant. "Mr. Wilkins," Miss Marple said, choosing her words with care, "I was just walking by the study window. The flower bed there. It looks quite disturbed, as if there was some sort of accident." The gardener's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. He stared intently at Miss Marple, as if assessing her. "Disturbed? How d'you mean?" "Trampled plants, scuffed earth, broken pottery, as if someone fell or perhaps climbed out in a great hurry." She watched his face closely. Mr. Wilkins' weathered features tightened. He glanced furtively towards the study window, then back at Miss Marple. The grief in his eyes was now mingled with a sharp, wary intelligence. "Climbed out? Why would anyone be climbing out of his lordship's window? Especially," he lowered his voice to a near whisper, "especially after he was found." "Exactly," Miss Markham murmured. "And the window was slightly ajar. There was a faint smell, rather unpleasant, like bitter almonds." Mr. Wilkins went very still. The colour drained from his already ruddy face. "Bitter almonds," he breathed, the secateurs forgotten in his hand. "You're sure?" "Quite sure," Miss Marple said firmly. "It faded quickly, but it was unmistakable. Mr. Wilkins, what was growing in that window box, and what plants are in that bed beneath the window?" The gardener swallowed hard. He looked around, ensuring they were alone, then beckoned Miss Marple closer. "This way," he said, his voice barely audible. "Not here." He led her not towards the disturbed bed, but deeper into the gardens, towards a secluded walled enclosure filled with herbs and less ornamental plants. The air here was thick with the scent of rosemary, thyme, and something pungent and medicinal. He stopped before a patch of tall, hooded, deep blue-violet flowers. "Monkshood," he said, his voice grim. "Oconite, napellus. Beautiful, isn't it? Deadly. Every part of it. Roots, leaves, flowers. Especially the roots. A taste of that root kills a man inside an hour. Agony, paralysis, stops the heart." He pointed to another patch nearby, featuring tall spires of pinkish-purple bell-shaped flowers. "Foxglove. Digitalis purpurea. Used for heart troubles, yes, in tiny, measured doses. Too much? Same result. Stops the heart dead. And the leaves, they taste bitter like almonds when crushed." He met Miss Marple's gaze, his own filled with dawning horror and understanding. His lordship, he had a particular interest, always asking about the toxic plants, said it was for historical research, wanted to know what grew wild on the estate, what could be mistaken for something harmless. Miss Marple felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "And the window box, Mr. Wilkins?" "At a lovely display of dwarf monkshood this year, deep blue. His lordship specifically requested it, said he liked the colour against the stone. Now, he gestured helplessly toward the west wing. Smashed to bits, you say, trampled. Exactly, Miss Marple confirmed. And the scuffed earth beneath the window, as if someone climbed out, perhaps in a panic, after— She left the sentence hanging, the implication clear. Mr. Wilkins sank onto a low stone bench, rubbing his calloused hands over his face. "Oh, dear Lord," he muttered. "It wasn't his heart, was it? It couldn't have been. Not with that smell, not with the monk's hood smashed, not with the bed torn up like that." He looked up at Miss Marple, his eyes pleading. "Who? Why? And why climb out the window? Why not just walk out the door?" "Excellent questions, Mr. Wilkins," Miss Marple said softly, sitting beside him. "Questions that need answers. The doctor declared it natural causes. The constable, well, he's likely to accept the doctor's word, especially with Lord Harrington's age and known heart troubles. No one is looking for murder." "Except you," Mr. Wilkins said, a note of grim respect. "Except me," Miss Marple agreed. "And now you. Mr. Wilkins, I need your help. Your knowledge of these plants, of this garden, of the routines of this house, it's invaluable. Can you tell me anything else? Did Lord Harrington seem worried lately? Did he mention anyone being angry with him? Any complex matters?" Mr. Wilkins frowned, concentrating. "Worried? Aye, these past few weeks. Jumpy. Snapped at me over trifles. Kept to his study more. Complex matters." He hesitated. "There was talk among the staff. Eleanor, his daughter-in-law. Her finances are a mess. Always needing money. Timothy's schooling, the upkeep of the dower house. She asked the lordship for help again just last week. He refused flat. Said she'd had enough." "And Cedric?" Miss Marple prompted. "Cedric. I spit that name. Always had his hand out. Gambles, you know. Horses, cards. Owes money all over the county. The lordship found out. Cut him off completely last month. Told him he'd get nothing more until he proved himself responsible. Cedric was furious, storming about like a bull in a china shop." He paused, and then added quietly, "And there was someone else, a stranger. Seen him a couple of times lurking near the west wing. Tall, thin feller, wear a dark coat, collar turned up. Never spoke to anyone, just watched. Lucy, the parlour maid, she saw him too. Made her nervous." Miss Marple absorbed this information, her mind cataloguing the pieces. The desperate daughter-in-law, the disinherited and furious nephew, the mysterious stranger. The motive was taking shape. Opportunity seemed plausible, given the disturbed window scene. And the means, the deadly monk's hood and foxglove, was horrifyingly clear.
"Mr. Wilkins," she said, her voice steady despite the grimness of their discussion, "I believe Lord Harrington was murdered, poisoned, likely with something derived from these very plants, administered in his study. The person who did it either panicked or needed a quick escape, hence climbing out the window, smashing the box, and trampling the bed in their haste. They may have been seen, or feared being seen, hence the stranger's possible significance." The gardener nodded slowly, the initial shock giving way to a steely resolve. "Aye, that makes a dreadful kind of sense. What can I do, Miss Marple?" "First," she said, "keep your eyes and ears open. Note anything unusual, anyone acting out of character, any mention of Lord Harrington's will. That often stirs things up. Second, can you carefully examine that disturbed bed and the area beneath the window? Look for anything that might have been dropped. A button, a scrap of fabric, a tool, anything out of place. Be discreet. And third, can you tell me exactly where the monkshood and foxglove are kept? Are any roots or leaves missing? Could someone have easily taken some without being noticed?"
Mr. Wilkins stood up, his posture straighter, the initial shock giving way to a steely resolve. "Aye, that makes a dreadful kind of sense. What can I do, Miss Marple?" "The monkshood patch is here, as you saw. The foxglove is over by the old wall. I keep the more potent stuff locked in the poison cabinet in the shed. Keys are always on my belt." He patted a leather pouch at his waist. "But the fresh plants, anyone could nip off a leaf or a flower if they knew what they were looking for, especially at dusk or early morning. I'll check the beds now, Miss Marple, carefully, and I'll watch. I've worked this land 40 years. I know its secrets, and I know when something's rotten." He looked towards the hall, his expression hardening. His lordship deserved better than this. Whoever did this, they need to answer for it. Miss Marple rose, feeling a surge of gratitude for this unlikely ally. His quiet knowledge and deep connection to the place were proving invaluable. "Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. Your discretion and your observations are crucial. We must proceed carefully. The murderer believes they've gotten away with it, hidden behind the doctor's diagnosis. We mustn't alert them prematurely." "Understood, Miss Marple," he said, touching his cap. "I'll be about my work. The roses need tending." He gave her a small, grim smile that didn't reach his eyes, then turned and walked purposefully towards the west wing, his steps now measured and alert. Miss Marple watched him go, then turned her own gaze back towards the imposing facade of Harrington Hall. The luncheon guests would be dispersing soon, the fete would wind down. Life, on the surface, would attempt to return to normal. But beneath the surface, in the trampled earth beneath the study window, in the lingering scent of bitter almonds, in the desperate motives of Eleanor and Cedric, and in the shadowy presence of the stranger, a dark secret festered. She had confirmed the murder. She had identified the likely means, the garden's own deadly bounty. She had found her first crucial ally in the unassuming gardener, and she had 3 distinct threads of suspicion: the financially desperate Eleanor, the disinherited and volatile Cedric, and the enigmatic figure seen lurking near the scene. The question of who climbed out that window, who crushed the monkshood, who administered the fatal dose, remained tantalizingly out of reach. But Miss Marple felt the familiar, sharp thrill of the hunt begin to stir within her. The pieces were scattered, but the pattern was emerging, and with Mr. Wilkins watching the garden, she knew the next piece of the puzzle would soon reveal itself. She adjusted her knitting bag, squared her shoulders, and began the walk back to her car, her mind already racing ahead to the parlour-maid, Lucy, and the secrets the quietest observers often held. The game, as they say, was afoot.
Chapter 2. The Parlour-Maid's Revelation. The following dawn broke gray and sullen over St. Mary Mead, the sky a low, bruised ceiling promising rain that hadn't yet fallen. Inside her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, a half-knitted sock resting forgotten in her lap. Her cup of tea, long since cooled, mirrored the steely light outside. The events at Harrington Hall replayed in her mind with relentless clarity: the stifled atmosphere at luncheon, the trampled flower bed, the faint, terrifying scent of bitter almonds, and Mr. Wilkins' grim confirmation of the garden's deadly potential. Lord Harrington hadn't died peacefully in his sleep. He'd been murdered, poisoned with extracts plucked from his own grounds. The gardener's report had been invaluable. Eleanor's financial desperation, Cedric's violent reaction to being cut off, the shadowy figure lurking near the west wing, these were the raw threads of motive and opportunity, yet they remained just that, threads. Miss Marple needed to weave them into a coherent pattern, and for that she required a different kind of observer, someone who moved silently within the walls of Harrington Hall, whose eyes missed nothing, and whose ears absorbed the unspoken tensions that crackled beneath the surface of polite society. She needed Lucy, the parlour-maid. The challenge was approaching her without raising suspicion. Miss Marple couldn't simply summon the girl. It required finesse, a carefully constructed pretext that would allow for a private conversation amidst the household's current state of brittle normality.
An idea formed, one that leveraged Lady Alicia's convalescence and Miss Marple's own perceived role as a harmless, slightly meddlesome old lady. By mid-morning, fortified by a fresh pot of tea and a slice of seed cake, Miss Marple was being shown into the morning room at Harrington Hall by a stiff-backed Mrs. Groves. The housekeeper's expression was a mask of professional grief, but her eyes held a watchful anxiety. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice tight, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" "Good morning, Mrs. Groves," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm. "So kind of you to see me. I've just come from dear Lady Alicia, who sends her regards, of course. She was worrying about her favorite Worcester teapot, the one with the hand-painted birds. She fears it might be packed away in the attic during the current upheaval. She asked if I might just pop in and reassure her it's safely stored. She finds such small comforts important now." It was a plausible enough lie, playing on Lady Alicia's known quirks and the general disruption following the master's death. Mrs. Grove's rigid posture softened fractionally. The Worcester said, "Yes, I believe it is in the attic. I could have one of the maids—" "Oh, no need to trouble them," Mrs. Grove said quickly. "I know precisely which crate she means. I helped her pack it myself years ago. If you could just point me towards the attic stairs, I won't be a moment. And perhaps," she added artfully, "while I'm here, I might leave a small posy I picked from my garden for Lady Alicia's room, for when she returns, a cheerful thought." The mention of flowers seemed to disarm the housekeeper further. "That's very thoughtful, Miss Marple, very thoughtful indeed. The attic stairs are just at the end of the upstairs corridor, third door on the left. Mind the step, it's steep." She gestured vaguely. "I'm afraid we're rather short-staffed today. Lucy is seeing to the morning tea in the small drawing room. Cedric and Eleanor are receiving callers." Of course," Miss Marple murmured sympathetically. "These are difficult times. Thank you, Mrs. Groves." As the housekeeper bustled away, Miss Marple didn't head towards the attic stairs. Instead, she drifted towards the small drawing room, guided by the faint clink of porcelain and the low murmur of voices. The door was ajar. Peering in, she saw Eleanor Harrington seated stiffly on a chaise longue, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. Cedric paced restlessly near the fireplace, his hands thrust deep into his pockets. Facing them, pouring tea from a delicate china pot, was Lucy. Miss Marple waited, timing her entrance carefully. As Lucy finished pouring and turned to place the pot back on its stand, Miss Marple stepped into the room, clutching a small, damp bunch of late-blooming roses and lavender wrapped in a damp cloth. "Oh, dear me," she exclaimed, her voice a picture of flustered apology. "So sorry to intrude. Mrs. Grove said Lucy might be in here, and I just wanted to leave these for Lady Alicia's room. Such a shame to miss her, but perhaps I could just pop them in a little water somewhere." Eleanor started, looking flustered. Cedric stopped pacing, scowling. Lucy froze for a split second, then curtsied quickly. "Miss Marple, of course, I can take them for you." "Nonsense, dear," Miss Marple said breezily, moving further into the room. "I can find a vase myself, I'm sure. Don't let me disturb your conference." She glanced pointedly at Cedric and Eleanor, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Such a trying time for everyone. One hardly knows how to behave, does one?" Cedric recovered first, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all, Miss Marple. We were just discussing arrangements, practicalities." He gestured vaguely at the tea things. "Would you care for a cup? Lucy, pour for Miss Marple." This was an opening Miss Marple hadn't dared to hope for. "Oh, that would be lovely, Cedric. Thank you. Just a splash of milk, no sugar." She settled herself into a small armchair near a side table, positioning it so she could observe Lucy easily. The parlor-maid, now composed, moved with quiet efficiency, selecting a cup and saucer, pouring the tea, adding the milk. Her hands, Miss Marple noted, were steady now, but her eyes remained watchful, darting between her employers and the unexpected guest. As Lucy handed her the cup, Miss Marple caught her gaze for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was a silent question, an acknowledgement of shared, unspoken knowledge. Lucy's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, before she lowered them demurely.
"To arrangements," Miss Marple said, taking a sip of the excellent tea. "One imagines there's a great deal to settle. Lord Harrington ran such a complex establishment. And of course," she added delicately, "there's the matter of the will. That always causes such discussion, doesn't it? Especially when changes have been made recently." The effect was electric. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Cedric spun around, his face flushing crimson. "The will?" he blustered. "What makes you think anything's changed?" "Oh, just village talk, dear," Miss Marple said airily, waving a dismissive hand. "One hears things. People speculate, especially when someone like Lord Harrington, who was always so decisive, might have had second thoughts about provisions, particularly regarding family members who perhaps relied on his generosity more than others." She let the implication hang in the suddenly thick air, her gaze resting first on Eleanor, then on Cedric. Eleanor looked away, her knuckles white where she gripped the arm of the chaise. Cedric's jaw worked furiously. "The village gossip is rarely accurate, Miss Marple," he snapped. "Father's will was made years ago, perfectly straightforward." "Is that so?" Miss Marple murmured, taking another sip. "Still, one can't help but feel for those who might be disappointed. Financial matters can be so terribly stressful, can't they? Eleanor, dear, you look quite pale. Are you quite well? The dower house must be expensive to maintain alone, and Timothy's schooling." Eleanor's head snapped up. "We manage perfectly well, Miss Marple," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "His lordship was always considerate." "Was he?" Miss Marple pressed gently, her eyes sharp. "I understood there'd been some disagreement recently about financial support. Only last week, perhaps." The silence that followed was profound. Lucy, who had been standing quietly near the tea trolley, seemed to shrink into the background, but Miss Marple saw the girl's gaze flicker towards Eleanor, a flicker of something pity, confirmation, in her eyes. "That's private," Eleanor finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. Of course," Miss Marple soothed. "Forgive an old woman's curiosity. It's just that one hears such conflicting things. Cedric, for instance, I understand your investments haven't been as fortunate as one might hope. Horses can be terribly unpredictable, can't they? And father's displeasure at certain expenditures." Cedric looked like he might explode. He took a step towards Miss Marple, his fists clenched. "That's enough! My finances are none of your concern, nor anyone else's. Father had no right to cut me off like that, after everything I've done for this estate, running errands, smoothing things over with tenants." He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd said too much. "Cut you off," Miss Marple echoed softly, her gaze unwavering. "So there was a recent change, a significant one, regarding your inheritance, Cedric?" He glared at her, breathing heavily, but said nothing, his face a mask of fury and frustration. The confirmation hung in the air, thick and ugly. Lord Harrington had changed his will, and Cedric had been a victim of that change. Eleanor's reaction suggested she might have been affected too, though perhaps not as directly. The tension was palpable, a physical weight in the room. Eleanor looked close to tears, Cedric like a caged animal. Miss Marple knew she had pushed as far as she dared for now. She needed to speak to Lucy alone. "Well," she said, setting her cup down with a decisive little click that made them both jump, "I mustn't take up any more of your valuable time. Arrangements to make, callers to receive. Thank you for the tea, Cedric. Eleanor, do take care of yourself. Stress can be so damaging to the constitution." She rose, picking up her posy of flowers. "Lucy, dear, would you be an absolute angel and show me where I might find a small vase, and perhaps point me towards Lady Alicia's room? I'd hate to leave these to wilt."
Lucy curtsied again, relief washing over her faces. "Of course, Miss Marple," she said. "This way." As they left the drawing-room, Miss Marple could feel Cedric's furious glare boring into her back, and Eleanor's stifled sobs following them out into the hall. The silence in the corridor was a blessed relief after the charged atmosphere. Lucy led her not towards the attic stairs, but towards the back stairs and the service areas. "There's a small vase in the still room, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and hurried, "and her ladyship's room is just along this corridor." "Thank you, Lucy," Miss Marple said, matching the girl's quiet tone. "That was rather difficult in there. Cedric has quite a temper, doesn't he?" Lucy nodded vigorously, her eyes wide. "He does, Miss Marple. He was shouting at his lordship last week, in the study. I was polishing the silver outside the door. I couldn't help hear." She glanced nervously back down the corridor towards the drawing-room. "About money," Miss Marple prompted gently. "About the will," Lucy whispered, stopping outside the still-room door. "The room said he'd changed it, that Cedric wouldn't get a penny more until he proved himself responsible. Cedric was furious, said his lordship was ruining him, that he'd be ruined socially, that people would laugh. He called him cruel, selfish, threatened to— well, he didn't say what, but it sounded nasty." "And Eleanor?" Miss Marple asked, stepping into the still room. Lucy followed, closing the door softly behind them. The room smelled of herbs and beeswax. Miss Marple placed her flowers on a wooden workbench. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Lucy bit her lip. "She came to see his lordship the day before it happened. She was crying. Begging, I think. I took tea in. She said Timothy needed new school books, a winter coat, that the roof at the Dower House leaked dreadfully. His lordship was very stern, said he'd already given her more than enough, that she needed to learn to manage, that Timothy could go to the local school if she couldn't afford the fees." She left looking broken, Miss Marple, like all the hope had gone out of her.
Miss Marple absorbed this, her mind connecting the dots. Cedric's violent rage at being disinherited, Eleanor's desperate pleading and subsequent despair. Both had powerful motives. Both had been seen arguing with the victim shortly before his death. But what about the stranger? Mr. Wilkins had mentioned him, and Lucy had seemed nervous when he was brought up before. "Lucy," Miss Marple said, her voice barely above a murmur, "Mr. Wilkins mentioned you'd seen someone unusual near the West Wing, around the time of his lordship's passing." Lucy paled. She twisted her apron in her hands. "Yes, Miss Marple. The night before last. It was late, past midnight. I couldn't sleep. Went down to the kitchen for some warm milk. I saw a light moving in the grounds, near the study window. At first I thought it was Mr. Wilkins checking something, but it wasn't. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes, coat collar turned up. He was moving fast, almost running, away from the house, towards the old gate by the woods. He carried something, looked like a small bundle, wrapped in cloth." "Did you see his face?" Miss Marple asked, leaning forward. "No, Miss Marple. It was too dark, and he kept his head down. But there was something odd. When he passed under the lantern by the stables, I saw his shoes. They weren't country shoes. They were shiny, like city shoes. Very clean. Not muddy at all, even though he'd been walking on the grass." City shoes. Clean. That was a significant detail. It ruled out a local poacher or a groundsman. It suggested someone from outside, someone who hadn't been tramping through the muddy grounds or who had been very careful, someone who might have climbed out of a window onto a gravel path. "And the bundle?" Miss Marple pressed.
Any idea what it might have been?" Lucy frowned, concentrating. "It wasn't big. Maybe the size of a book or a wrapped parcel? He held it close to his chest, like it was important or valuable." Miss Marple's mind raced. A book? A parcel? Could it have been the stolen will? Or something else entirely? Something connected to the plants? Mr. Wilkins had mentioned the locked poison cabinet in his shed. Had someone broken in? But the keys were always on his belt. "Thank you, Lucy," Miss Marple said, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "You've been incredibly helpful, more than you know. You must be careful, though. Don't mention seeing this man to anyone else. Not Cedric, not Eleanor, not even Mrs. Groves. Not yet." Lucy nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "I won't, Miss Marple. I promise. I saw how his lordship looked that last day, worried. And now I want whoever did it to be found. He wasn't always kind, but he didn't deserve that." "No, he didn't," Miss Marple agreed. She picked up her flowers, now needing only water. "Could you show me to Lady Alicia's room? Then I'll leave you in peace." As they walked down the corridor, Miss Marple's thoughts crystallized. She had her 3 prime suspects, each with compelling motives and circumstantial links to the crime. Cedric Harrington, disinherited and furious, publicly threatened his uncle after a violent argument. He had the strongest motive of immediate financial ruin and a history of volatility. Opportunity? He lived in the house. Could he have poisoned his uncle and then climbed out the window in a panic, or to create an alibi? The disturbed flower bed suggested a hurried exit. But would Cedric, for all his faults, have the botanical knowledge to use monkshood or foxglove effectively, or the nerve to handle such deadly substances? Eleanor, desperate for money to maintain her home and son's future, publicly rebuffed and humiliated by her father-in-law the day before his death. Her motive was one of crushing despair and perceived necessity. She also lived in the house, granting opportunity. But could the quiet, seemingly fragile Eleanor commit such a violent act? And again, the knowledge of poisons? It seemed less likely for her than for Cedric, though desperation could drive people to extraordinary lengths. The mysterious stranger, the unknown factor, seen lurking near the scene, acting furtively, carrying an unidentified bundle, wearing incongruously clean city shoes. His presence was inherently suspicious. Could he be the murderer? If so, what was his connection to Lord Harrington? Why poison him? And what was in the bundle? Stolen goods? The changed will? Or something related to the plants? Mr. Wilkins had mentioned the locked poison cabinet in his shed. Had someone broken in? But the keys were always on his belt. Lucy opened the door to Lady Alicia's suite. The room was elegant, feminine, and currently untouched, awaiting its mistress's return. Miss Marple placed the flowers in a delicate porcelain vase Lucy fetched from the adjoining bathroom. As she arranged the stems, the scent of lavender filling the air, she felt the weight of the unresolved questions. Cedric's rage, Eleanor's despair, the stranger's furtive flight, each was a piece of the puzzle, but none provided the complete picture. The means, the poison, pointed towards someone with specific knowledge, which neither Cedric nor Eleanor obviously possessed, but which the stranger might. The disturbed scene beneath the window suggested a panicked escape, fitting Cedric's temperament, or a stranger's need for haste, but less so Eleanor's.
the bundle carried by the stranger remained a tantalizing enigma. What did a man in city shoes, carrying a mysterious parcel late at night near a murder scene, come from? And where did he go? The answer, Miss Marple suspected, lay not in the volatile emotions of the Harrington family, but in the quiet, ordered world of knowledge. The village library, with its records and its observant keeper, beckoned. It was time to seek out Miss Finch.
Chapter 3. The Librarian's Clue. The village of Chipping Cleghorn, nestled in a fold of the Sussex Downs, wore its antiquity like a comfortable shawl. Timbered houses leaned companionably against each other, and the high street, though accommodating a motor car or two, still retained the gentle pace of a bygone era. At its heart stood the public library, a solid Victorian building of red brick and stone, its windows perpetually steamed against the chill of autumn or the damp of winter. It was here, amidst the scent of aging paper, beeswax polish, and the faint, dusty aroma of knowledge itself, that Miss Marple sought her next ally. She pushed open the heavy oak door, the bell above jangling a cheerful counterpoint to the library's hushed reverence. Inside, the air was still, broken only by the soft rustle of turning pages, the whisper of a child being shushed, and the methodical thump, thump, thump of a date stamp wielded with unwavering precision behind the main counter. Behind that counter, presiding over her domain like a benevolent but exacting monarch, sat Miss Finch. Miss Agatha Finch was a woman carved from the same oak as the library door. Tall, ramrod straight, and possessed of a formidable bosom, she wore her gray hair swept into a severe bun secured by ivory hairpins. Her spectacles, perched on the end of her nose, magnified eyes that missed nothing. A misplaced book, a surreptitious sweet unwrapped, or the subtle shift in a patron's demeanor that indicated confusion or, more rarely, mischief. She had been Chipping Cleghorn's librarian for 43 years, a repository not just of books, but of the village's collective memory, its secrets, and its reading habits. "Miss Marple," she murmured, her voice low and resonant, as the elderly spinster approached the counter. "To what do we owe the pleasure? Lady Alicia's gardening manuals, perhaps? Or something lighter for her convalescence?" Miss Finch's gaze, sharp as a newly sharpened pencil, took in Miss Marple's expression, the focused intensity beneath the veneer of habitual fluster. "Good morning, Miss Finch," Miss Marple replied, her own voice a careful balance of polite inquiry and underlying purpose. "Actually, I find myself in need of some rather specialized botanical information, something a little obscure, perhaps even dangerous." Miss Finch's eyebrows, perfectly arched, lifted a fraction. "Dangerous botany? That sounds intriguing, and potentially troublesome. Pray, what specific area are we investigating? Poisonous flora? Medicinal herbs with unfortunate side effects? Or perhaps something more esoteric?" "Precisely." Miss Marple leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Poisonous flora, Miss Finch, native to this area. Specifically, plants whose effects might mimic heart failure, or whose extracts could be administered discreetly. And I'm particularly interested in any recent publications or detailed local studies on the subject." Miss Finch removed her spectacles, polished them meticulously with a soft cloth from her pocket, and replaced them. The gesture was unhurried, giving her time to assess. "Aconitum napellus, monkshood, digitalis purpurea, foxglove, conium maculatum,
hemlock, Atropa belladonna, deadly nightshade. The usual suspects? Or were you thinking of something less common? Her knowledge was immediate, precise. Miss Marple felt a surge of respect. Monkshood and foxglove are indeed central to my research, but I need confirmation of their properties, methods of extraction, symptoms of ingestion, and crucially, any documented cases of their misuse in recent years, locally or regionally. Recent misuse, Miss Finch repeated, her gaze becoming distant, thoughtful. She gestured towards a narrow, dimly lit aisle labeled Local History and Botany. Follow me, Miss Marple. We have a small but comprehensive section. And, she added, her voice dropping even lower, we keep a file of newspaper clippings related to unusual occurrences, botanical mishaps, accidental poisonings, suspicious deaths where plants were implicated. It's not official, of course, merely a record of what the press has deemed noteworthy over the decades. She led Miss Marple down the aisle, the scent of old paper growing stronger. Stopping before a shelf of leather-bound volumes and slim pamphlets, she selected a heavy tome titled Flora of the South Downs, Toxic Varieties and Historical Uses, and a more modern paperback, Deadly Harvest, Poisonous Plants of the British Isles. She placed them on a small reading table tucked beneath a high, leaded light window. Begin here, Miss Finch instructed. The Flora volume has detailed entries on extraction methods and symptomatology. The modern book includes case studies. I shall retrieve the clippings file. She moved away with surprising quietness for a woman of her stature, disappearing into a back room marked Archives. Miss Marple settled into the hard wooden chair, opening the heavy tome first. The text was dense, the language archaic, but the information was chillingly clear. Monkshood, roots highly toxic. Alkaloid aconitin causes rapid onset of burning sensation, numbness, vomiting, paralysis of respiratory muscles, cardiac arrest. Symptoms could indeed mimic a massive heart attack. Foxglove, leaves contain cardiac glycosis, digitalis, causing nausea, vomiting, visual disturbances, slow then rapid pulse, ventricular fibrillation. Again, potentially mistaken for heart failure, especially in an elderly man. Methods of extraction varied from simple infusions to more complex chemical processes requiring some knowledge. She was engrossed in a particularly gruesome account of an 18th century poisoning when Miss Finch returned, carrying a slim, bulging manila folder tied with string. She placed it on the table next to the books. The Botanical Bewilderments File, she announced, with a faint, dry smile. Decades of local misadventure and malice. She sat opposite Miss Marple, watching her intently. Miss Marple opened the file. Inside were yellowed newspaper cuttings, meticulously dated and sourced. Most were tragic accidents, children eating attractive berries, foragers misidentifying mushrooms, gardeners handling sap without gloves. But a few stood out. A clipping from 1925 detailed the death of a wealthy recluse near East Grinstead, initially ruled natural causes until a suspiciously knowledgeable housemaid was found to have purchased foxglove leaves for her nerves. Another, from 1931, recounted the trial of a farmer's wife who poisoned her husband with monkshood root steeped in his nightly whiskey. She'd learned the properties from an old herbal her grandmother owned.
"These are illuminating," Miss Marple murmured, scanning the clippings. It confirms the means were certainly available, and the knowledge, while specialized, isn't entirely arcane. Indeed, Miss Finch agreed. Knowledge is power, Miss Marple, and sometimes power is misused. Now, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. You mentioned recent publications or studies. Was there anything specific you were hoping to find? Or anyone in particular whose reading habits might have shifted towards such subjects? Miss Marple met her gaze. The librarian's intuition was as finely honed as her own. As a matter of fact, yes. I understand Lord Harrington took an interest in toxic plants recently. For historical research, he claimed. Did he borrow any books on the subject? Miss Finch's lips tightened into a thin line. She didn't need to consult any register. He did. Several. Over the past 6 months. Deadly Harvest, the one you have there. Toxic Flora of the British Isles, a rather technical monograph on alkaloid extraction. And, she paused, her gaze becoming piercing, he also requested access to our archive of old estate maps and land surveys, specifically those detailing the grounds of Harrington Hall and the surrounding woodlands. Miss Marple felt a prickle of excitement. Estate maps? Why would he need those for botanical research? Precisely my question, Miss Finch stated. He claimed he was tracing the historical spread of certain species, but the maps he requested, they detailed old pathways, disused outbuildings, boundary markers, not typical flora distribution maps. She rose smoothly. Wait here. She returned moments later with a large, rolled map tied with a faded blue ribbon. Carefully untying it, she spread it flat on the table, weighting the corners with the heavy botanical tomes. It was a detailed survey of the Harrington estate, dated 1890. Miss Finch pointed with a long, elegant finger. Here, she indicated the main house and gardens, and here, her finger moved to the western edge of the estate, bordering dense woodland. This is the old station house. The railway line was realigned in 1910, leaving this building derelict. Lord Harrington specifically requested detailed plans of this structure and the immediate surrounding area. She tapped another spot on the map, where a thin line indicated a disused track leading from the station house deeper into the woods. And this old cart track, now overgrown, he wanted to know its exact route and condition. Miss Marple studied the map, her mind racing. A derelict station house, an old track leading into the woods, Lord Harrington's sudden interest in toxic plants and the estate's forgotten corners. It wasn't adding up to simple historical curiosity. It felt like reconnaissance, mapping, planning. Fascinating, Miss Marple murmured, and potentially significant. Miss Finch, you mentioned Cedric Harrington also borrowed books on toxic plants? Miss Finch nodded curtly. Indeed, about 4 months ago. He borrowed Deadly Harvest and a popular guide to wildflowers, kept them overdue by 3 weeks, returned them slightly grubby, as if handled outdoors. He seemed agitated when he returned them, made some offhand remark about knowing his enemies. She sniffed disdainfully. Eleanor? Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Harrington? No, her tastes run more to romantic fiction and household management guides, nothing remotely botanical. However, she did borrow a book on local history about 2 months ago. Chipping Cleghorn and Environs, a social history. It contained chapters on old smuggling routes and the estate's role during various conflicts. She returned it promptly, but seemed preoccupied. Mentioned finding some of the old ways rather unsettling. Smuggling routes, old ways, the derelict station house, the old track leading into the woods. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was a picture with disturbing shadows. Lord Harrington wasn't just researching poisons, he was researching the hidden geography of his own estate. Cedric was reading about deadly plants. Eleanor was reading about hidden paths and illicit history. What connected them? Miss Finch. Miss Marple said slowly, "This has been extraordinarily helpful, but there's one more thing. You mentioned the newspaper clippings file. Does it contain anything unusual? Not just poisonings, but perhaps strange occurrences, unexplained events, anything that seemed out of place, especially near Harrington Hall or involving strangers?" Miss Finch considered this, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. Strange occurrences. We do have a section for unexplained phenomena and local curiosities. Mostly ghost stories, lights in the woods, that sort of thing. But, she hesitated, then stood decisively. There was something. About 6 months ago, a series of brief, rather odd notices in the personal columns of the Chipping Cleghorn Chronicle. Not exactly news, more like coded messages. We keep a file of all the local papers, including the personal columns. Some patrons find them diverting. She moved towards a large, flat filing cabinet against the far wall, pulling open a drawer labeled Newspapers, Personal Columns, 1930 to Present. She extracted a slim folder marked Chronicle, Jan to June 1945. Returning to the table, she flipped through the clippings until she found the ones she sought. They were small, innocuous-looking ads. April 12th. Gardener's Delight. Rare seeds available. Ask for nightshade at the usual place. Prompt collection advised. April 26th. Nightshade received. Conditions favorable. Proceed with planting. Moon phase optimal. May 10th. Harvest expected week commencing 22nd. Ensure transport arranged. Usual rendezvous. May 24th. Harvest successful. Quality variable. Some specimens damaged. Transport delayed. Await further instructions. June 7th. Transport confirmed. Midnight. Old Gate. Signal. 2 short, 1 long. Package ready. June 21st. Package collected. Proceed to next phase. Await confirmation of delivery. Miss Marple stared at the clippings, a cold certainty settling in her bones. The language was deliberately mundane, yet the underlying meaning was sinister. Gardener's Delight, nightshade, planting, harvest, transport, package, rendezvous, old gate, signal. It wasn't about gardening, it was about smuggling. And the timing, starting just before Lord Harrington began his own research into toxic plants and estate maps, culminating in late June, weeks before his death. Miss Finch, Miss Marple breathed, her voice tight with urgency. Where is this old gate?
Miss Finch pointed immediately to the spot on the estate map she had spread earlier. Here, exactly where the old cart track from the derelict station house meets the boundary fence. It's barely visible now, overgrown and forgotten, but it's there. Miss Marple's mind connected the final, horrifying dots. Lord Harrington hadn't just been researching poisons and old maps out of idle curiosity. He'd stumbled onto something happening on his own land, something illicit, dangerous, involving the derelict station house and the old track, a perfect, isolated location for illicit activity. The harvest wasn't plants. It was smuggled goods. The package was the contraband. The old gate was the collection point. He'd started investigating. He'd borrowed books on toxic plants, perhaps to understand what might be smuggled, or perhaps to identify substances used. He'd studied the maps to understand the operation's layout. He'd likely been watching, observing. And then he'd been found dead, poisoned, with substances readily available from his own garden. The murder wasn't just about the will, about Cedric's rage or Eleanor's despair. It was about silencing him, permanently, before he could expose the conspiracy operating right under his nose. The changed will
Cedric's fury, Eleanor's desperation, they were still factors, powerful motives that might have been exploited or even manipulated by the real culprits. The mysterious stranger Lucy had seen running from the hall late at night, carrying a bundle. He wasn't just a random intruder. He was part of this. The harvest collected, the package delivered, or perhaps he was the one who delivered the fatal dose, silencing Lord Harrington before he could act on his discoveries. "This changes everything, Miss Finch," Miss Marple said, her voice low and intense. "Lord Harrington's death wasn't simply a domestic tragedy born of greed. It was an assassination to protect a smuggling operation using his estate. The people involved, they are dangerous, very dangerous." Miss Finch looked grim, her usual composure replaced by a steely resolve. "I suspected something was amiss. Those messages, too precise, too regular, and Lord Harrington's sudden, focused interest, it wasn't natural. I kept the clippings, a librarian's habit, I suppose. Never know when information might become, well, pertinent." She carefully gathered the newspaper clippings, the map, and the botanical books. "What do you need, Miss Marple?" "I need to understand the operation," Miss Marple stated, her mind already racing ahead. "The station house is key. The railway line. How did they get the goods in or out? The messages mention transport and rendezvous. The railway signalman, Mr. Jenkins, he retired recently, didn't he? He worked that line for decades. He would know every train, every movement, every unusual happening near that old station house." "He did," Miss Finch confirmed. "Lives in a cottage near the level crossing on the old Guildford Road. A man who notices things, like a librarian." Miss Marple stood, the weight of the revelation settling upon her, yet sharpening her focus. The conspiracy was larger, darker than she had imagined. Lord Harrington had been murdered to protect it. Cedric and Eleanor were tangled in its web, whether as knowing participants, unwitting pawns, or simply convenient distractions. The mysterious stranger Lucy had seen running from the hall late at night carrying a bundle, he wasn't just a random intruder, he was part of this. The harvest collected, the package delivered, or perhaps he was the one who delivered the fatal dose, silencing Lord Harrington before he could act on his discoveries. "This changes everything, Miss Marple," her voice filled with genuine gratitude and renewed determination. "Lord Harrington's death wasn't simply a domestic tragedy born of greed. It was an assassination to protect a smuggling operation using his estate. The people involved, they are dangerous, very dangerous." Miss Finch looked grim, her usual composure replaced by a steely resolve. "I suspected something was amiss. Those messages, too precise, too regular, and Lord Harrington's sudden, focused interest, it wasn't natural. I kept the clippings, a librarian's habit, I suppose. Never know when information might become, well, pertinent." She carefully gathered the newspaper clippings, the map, and the botanical books. "What do you need, Miss Marple?" "I need to understand the operation," Miss Marple stated, her mind already racing ahead. "The station house is key, the railway line. How did they get the goods in or out? The messages mention transport and rendezvous. The railway signalman, Mr. Jenkins, he retired recently, didn't he? He worked that line for decades. He would know every train, every movement, every unusual happening near that old station house." "He did," Miss Finch confirmed. "Lives in a cottage near the level crossing on the old Guildford Road. A man who notices things, like a librarian."
Chapter 4. The Railway Signalman's Testimony. The old Guildford Road snaked away from Chipping Cleghorn like a weary serpent, winding through fields stubbled with the remnants of summer harvest and patches of woodland where mist clung like cobwebs in the early afternoon light. Nestled beside a level crossing, its red-painted gates currently standing open like lazy arms, sat a small stone cottage with a steeply pitched roof. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, carrying the scent of burning coal. This was the home of Albert Jenkins, retired signalman, a man who had spent 40 years watching the pulse of the railway beat along the tracks that skirted the northern edge of the Harrington estate. Miss Marple approached the cottage, the crunch of gravel under her feet, the only sound besides the distant cry of a rook. She knocked firmly on the blue-painted door. After a moment, it was opened by a man who seemed as solid and weathered as the railway sleepers he once tended. Albert Jenkins was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, with a face like a well-used map of England, lines etched deep around pale blue eyes that missed nothing despite their apparent calm. He wore a worn tweed jacket over a thick woolen jumper and sturdy boots. "Mr. Jenkins?" Miss Marple inquired, her voice carrying its usual gentle authority. "Aye," he replied, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. He looked her up and down, a flicker of curiosity in his steady gaze. "Can I help you?" "I hope so, Mr. Jenkins. My name is Jane Marple. I'm a friend of Lady Alicia Harrington. I'm making some inquiries regarding recent events at the Hall." He chose her words carefully, knowing the news of Lord Harrington's death was common knowledge, but the true cause was not. Jenkins' expression didn't change, but he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "'Eard about his lordship. Sad business. Heart gave out, they say. Though," he added, his gaze sharpening as it swept past her, towards the railway line visible beyond his garden hedge, "funny things happen near that line. Always have." He stepped back. "Best come in out of the damp. Cup of tea?" "Thank you. That would be most welcome." Miss Marple accepted, stepping into a small, spotlessly clean front room. The air smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, coal smoke, and something else, the distinctive oily tang of railway machinery. A framed certificate of service from the Southern Railway hung prominently on the wall, alongside a detailed hand-drawn map of the local lines and signals. A well-thumbed copy of Bradshaw's Railway Guide lay on a small table next to a worn armchair. Jenkins gestured her towards a chair by the roaring hearth. "Sit yourself down. Won't be a tick." He disappeared into what Miss Marple assumed was the kitchen, returning shortly with 2 steaming mugs of strong, dark tea. He handed one to her. "No sugar, I take it. You look like a no-sugar lady." "Quite correct, Mr. Jenkins. Thank you." She sipped the hot, bracing liquid. "You mentioned funny things near the line. I understand you knew the old station house on the Harrington estate well." Jenkins settled into his armchair, cradling his mug. "Knew it. I practically lived in that signal box, overlooking it for 20 years before they realigned the line in 10. Derelict now, of course, but it wasn't always. Quiet spot, even when it was active. Easy to miss things if you weren't paying attention. And I always paid attention." He tapped his temple. "Railway spine. Gets in the blood. You notice every irregularity, every sound that doesn't fit the pattern." "Such as," Miss Marple prompted gently. "Such as trains that aren't on the timetable," Jenkins said, his voice lowering slightly. "Especially at night, and especially near that old station house." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "His lordship, Lord Harrington, he started taking an interest in that area again few months back. Came down to the line a couple of times, just standing there, looking towards the old station house. Had a map with him. Looked serious, worried even. Asked me about the track condition, the stage of the building. Said he was thinking about historical preservation. Sounded like rot to me." Miss Marple felt a jolt. This corroborated Miss Finch's information about Lord Harrington's research. "And did you see anything unusual yourself, Mr. Jenkins, around the time he was looking into things?" Jenkins took a slow sip of tea, his eyes distant, focused on the glowing coals in the grate. "Aye, things started happening. Little things at first, Lights moving in the old station house late at night. Not electric, too flickery. Torchlight, maybe. Then must be 6 weeks back now, I heard something. Not a train, a lorry. Big engine, rumbling, coming down the old cart track that leads from the station house toward the woods. That track's barely passable, hasn't been used properly since the war. Yet a lorry went down it quiet-like, around 2 in the morning. No lights showing, just the sound. Then later, same night, I heard it coming back out. Sounded heavier. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A lorry on the disused track, near the derelict station house? It fit perfectly with the smuggling operation suggested by the coded messages. "That's very significant, Mr. Jenkins. Did you see the lorry?" "Nah, too dark, and the trees hide the track from the cottage. But I know the sound of a Bedford OY lorry when I hear one. Worked on them during the war. Distinctive engine rattle." He paused, then added, "Then about a month later, I saw something else, something that tied it all together." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that filled the small room. "It was the night his lordship, Lord Harrington, died. Or the night before, rather. Just gone midnight. I couldn't sleep, old railwayman's habit, ears still pricked. I was looking out my back window, which gives a clear view up the line toward the old station house, and I saw a train."
"A train? But the line's disused there," Miss Marple said, puzzled. "Not a scheduled train, Miss Marple, a special, a small engine, maybe a shunter, pulling just 1, maybe 2 wagons, no lights, running dark. It came from the direction of the main junction, slowed right down as it approached the old station house siding, the one that's overgrown but still technically connected to the main line. It stopped there, just sat in the darkness, hissing steam. No one got on or off that I could see. Then, after about 10 minutes, it moved off again, slow and quiet, back the way it came." Miss Marple stared at him, the implications chilling. A secret train, running dark, stopping precisely at the derelict station house on the night Lord Harrington was murdered. It couldn't be coincidence. "Did you see anyone near the train or the station house?" Jenkins nodded slowly, his face grim. "Aye, as the train was pulling away, a figure detached itself from the deeper shadows near the station building. Tall, thin man. Moved fast, heading away from the line towards the old gate. He was carrying something, bundled up, looked heavy. He had a torch, but he kept it pointed down, only using it briefly to find his footing on the track. But for a second, when he passed under that broken signal lamp-post," Jenkins' eyes narrowed, "I saw his shoes, shiny, black, city shoes, not a speck of mud on them. Odd that, walking across that rough ground." City shoes, clean. Miss Marple's mind flashed back to Lucy's description of the stranger she'd seen fleeing the hall. The details matched perfectly. This was the same man. The bundle he carried, could it be the same one Lucy saw? Or was this the package mentioned in the coded ads, collected from the secret train? The timing was devastatingly precise. The train arrives, the bundle is collected, the stranger flees, and Lord Harrington is found dead the next morning. "Mr. Jenkins," Miss Marple said, her voice tight with urgency, "this is vital. Did you notice anything else about the man? Or the train? Any markings on the engine, the wagons?" Jenkins frowned, concentrating. "The engine, small, dark, couldn't make out the number in the dark. The wagon, it was covered, tarpaulin. But there was something. When the train first stopped, a beam of light swept out from the station house towards it. Not a torch, more powerful, like a signal lamp, but used briefly. Then it went out. And the figure, the tall man, he moved with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going, like he had done it before." He paused, then added a crucial detail.
There's one more thing. The signal box, the old one that used to control the points for that siding. It's locked up tight, keys held at the regional office. But the leather frame inside, it's mechanical, old-fashioned. If someone knew what they were doing and had the right tools, they could manually throw the points to divert a train onto that siding. It wouldn't be easy, but it's possible, especially if they had inside knowledge. He looked meaningfully at Miss Marple. Inside knowledge, someone familiar with the railway's workings, someone who could arrange a secret train, someone who could operate the points. The conspiracy was deeper, more organized than she had feared. It wasn't just opportunistic smugglers using an old building. It involved manipulating the railway infrastructure itself. "Mr. Jenkins," Miss Marple said, her voice tight with urgency. "This is extraordinary. You've provided the missing pieces, the transport mentioned in the messages, the rendezvous at the old gate. It was this secret train. The package was collected by the stranger you saw, the same man Lucy observed fleeing the hall. Lord Harrington discovered this operation. He was watching the station house, researching the maps. He became a threat, and he was silenced." Jenkins nodded grimly. "Makes a dreadful kind of sense. His lordship wasn't a fool. If he saw that train, saw that man, he'd know something was badly wrong. He'd confront them or threaten to expose them. They'd have to stop him." He sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "Used to be the railways were the arteries of the country, carried life, trade, hope. Now seems they carry death and deceit too." "Do you keep a log, Mr. Jenkins," Miss Marple asked suddenly, "of unusual movements, even after retirement?" A faint, almost proud smile touched Jenkins' lips. "Old habits, got a notebook, jot down anything odd on the line, times, descriptions, helps me sleep." He pushed himself up and went to a small desk in the corner. From a drawer, he produced a sturdy, leather-bound notebook. He flipped through pages filled with neat, precise entries, times of passing trains, notes on maintenance, occasional sightings of wildlife. Then he stopped, tapped a page. "Here, night of September 17th, 18th. Entry reads, 00:45 hours, unidentified movement, single loco, type uncertain, small, +1 covered truck, proceeding westbound, observed slowing at Harrington Old Siding, station area prox 10 minutes, observed single male figure departing station area towards the old gate. He was carrying something, bundled up, looked heavy. He had a torch, but he kept it pointed down, only using it briefly to find his footing on the track. But for a second, when he passed under that broken signal lamppost," he closed the notebook. "That's the night, Miss Marple, the night before they found him." Miss Marple felt a surge of triumph mixed with profound unease. Here it was, concrete, dated evidence of the secret train and the stranger's movements directly linked to the time frame of Lord Harrington's murder. It confirmed the smuggling operation was active, that the stranger was a key operative, and that Lord Harrington's death was almost certainly a direct result of his investigation into their activities. "Mr. Jenkins," Miss Marple said, her voice filled with gratitude, "this is invaluable. You've given me the operational blueprint, the how, the train, the station house, the collection point, the operative. But," she added, her expression hardening, "it still leaves the crucial questions unanswered. Who arranged this secret train? Who has the authority or the criminal connections to divert railway stock in the middle of the night? Who is this stranger? And, most importantly," she looked directly at the retired signalman, "who actually administered the poison to Lord Harrington? Was it the stranger, or was it someone closer to home, someone who let him in or provided the poison, knowing the operation was at risk?" Jenkins rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The train, that takes organization. someone with access to locomotives and sidings, someone who can falsify records or bribe the right people. Could be a railway official gone bad, could be someone with deep pockets and criminal contacts. The stranger, he's the hands-on man, the courier maybe. But the poison, that's personal, that's up close, that needs access to the hall, to his lordship. Could be the stranger if he got inside, but it could just as easily be someone already there, someone who stood to gain from his lordship's silence or from his death. He looked meaningfully towards the Harrington estate. Miss Marple knew he was right. Cedric's rage, Eleanor's despair, they were still potent factors. Had one of them discovering Lord Harrington was about to expose the smuggling and perhaps cut them off entirely, taken matters into their own hands? Had they used the garden's poisons, knowing it would look like natural causes or even implicate an outsider? Or had the stranger, perhaps during a confrontation, forced the poison on Lord Harrington? The bundle Jenkins saw him carrying, could it have been the poison, or something else entirely? She stood up, the weight of the evidence settling upon her. "You've been remarkably helpful, Mr. Jenkins, more than you know. Please, keep this notebook safe and be vigilant. If you see anything else unusual, anything at all—"
"You'll be the first to know, Miss Marple," Jenkins assured her, his expression resolute. "This is my line, my responsibility, even in retirement. His lordship deserved better, and whoever's using the railways for this, they need to be stopped." As Miss Marple walked back down the old Guildford Road, the mist thickening around her, the pieces of the conspiracy clicked into place with chilling clarity. The librarian had uncovered the what, smuggling, and the where, the derelict station house. The signalman had provided the how, secret train, manipulated points, and the when, the night of the murder. The parlour-maid and the gardener had identified the who, the mysterious stranger, and the means, garden poisons. She now understood the operation's logistics. Contraband, likely high value, given the secrecy and risk, brought in via the secret train to the isolated station house, collected by operatives like the stranger, and transported away via the old track and road. Lord Harrington had stumbled upon it, researched it, and was murdered to protect it. But the core identity of the murderer and the mastermind behind the smuggling ring remained elusive. Was Cedric involved, using his family connection to facilitate the operation and killing his uncle when he got too close? Was Eleanor somehow implicated, her desperation making her vulnerable to manipulation? Or was the stranger the killer, acting on orders from the shadowy figure who arranged the train? And what was the contraband? The coded messages mentioned harvest and quality variable. Did that refer to something perishable or something fragile? Artifacts? Drugs? Secrets? The innkeeper, Mrs. Green, at the village inn, was her next logical step. If the operation was active, people involved would need somewhere to stay, somewhere to talk. The inn was the hub of village life, a place where secrets were exchanged over pints of ale and plates of pie. Mrs. Green, with her vantage point behind the bar and her knowledge of every comer and goer, might hold the final piece of the puzzle, the identity of the ringleader and the nature of the illicit cargo. Miss Marple adjusted her knitting bag and quickened her pace. The net was closing, but the most dangerous part of the hunt was just beginning. She had the blueprint. Now she needed the name behind it.
Chapter 5. The Innkeeper's Secret. The harvest moon hung low and swollen over Chipping Cleghorn, casting a silvery, almost theatrical light over the village green. The remnants of the day's harvest festival, a few stray strands of bunting, a discarded cider cup, the faint, sweet smell of roasted apples and wood smoke clung to the cool night air.
Miss Marple, however, wasn't drawn to the lingering conviviality. Her path led towards the sturdy, ivy-clad bulk of the Horse and Groom, the village's principal inn, its windows glowing warmly against the darkness. Inside, behind the polished mahogany bar, presided Mrs. Martha Green, a woman whose placid smile and efficient movements masked eyes as sharp as broken glass and a memory like a steel trap. Miss Marple pushed open the heavy oak door, stepping into a wave of warmth, noise, and the comforting smells of beer, wax polish, and Mrs. Green's renowned steak and kidney pie. The taproom was busier than usual, filled with festival-goers winding down, their voices a cheerful hum. Mrs. Green, a stout woman in her late 50s, with flour-dusted forearms and hair scraped back into a practical bun, was pulling a pint for a farmer, her movements economical and precise. Her eyes flickered towards the door, registering Miss Marple's entrance with a microscopic pause before she finished serving the pint and wiped her hands on her apron. "Miss Marple?" she greeted, her voice a calm contralto that cut through the chatter. "Evening. Bit late for you, isn't it? Lady Alicia keeping you busy with her convalescence?" "Indeed, she is, though I find myself needing a breath of air away from invalid comforts. And," she added, lowering her voice slightly as Mrs. Green approached her table, "I was hoping I might trouble you for a small pot of tea. The festival cheer is a little robust for my taste tonight." Mrs. Green's lips twitched. "Tea it is. Not your usual tipple in here, but we can manage. Give me a moment." She bustled away, returning shortly with a steaming pot, a delicate cup, and a small plate of shortbread biscuits. She placed them on the table, then, instead of immediately returning to the bar, pulled out the opposite chair and sat down, folding her arms across her ample bosom. Her gaze was direct, appraising. "Tea and shortbread," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur barely audible over the hubbub. "In a taproom full of cider and ale. Something's on your mind, Miss Marple. Something that wouldn't be said over a pint with the vicar, I'll wager." I allowed a small, appreciative smile. "You're exceptionally perceptive, Mrs. Green, as always. Yes, there is something. Something concerning Lord Harrington's, passing." Mrs. Green's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "Aye, sad business. Heart gave out, they say. Though," she leaned fractionally closer, "hearts don't usually give out the night after a secret train pulls up to a derelict station house on your estate, do they? Or after a man in shiny city shoes is seen running from your study window, carrying a bundle." Miss Marple felt a surge of adrenaline. Mrs. Green knew. Of course she knew. The inn was the village's listening post. "So you've heard about Mr. Jenkins' sighting?" "Heard." Mrs. Green gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Miss Marple, Albert Jenkins might have retired from the signal box, but he hasn't retired from talking, especially down here of an evening after a pint or two. He told old Tom Fletcher about the train, the man with the bundle, the shoes. Tom told his wife. She told Elsie at the post office. And Elsie tells me everything." She tapped the side of her nose. "News travels faster than the Flying Scotsman in Chipping Cleghorn, especially news that smells wrong." "And what does this news smell like to you, Mrs. Green?" Miss Marple asked, taking a sip of the excellent tea. "Like trouble," Mrs. Green stated flatly. "Big trouble. Smuggling's been rife since the war. Everyone knows that. Shortages, rationing, creates opportunities for the unscrupulous. But using the old Harrington station house, that's bold. And bringing in a secret train? That takes connections. Serious connections. Someone who knows the railway. Someone who can bend the rules. Someone with enough clout to keep it quiet." She paused, her gaze sweeping the taproom before returning to Miss Marple. "And Lord Harrington, he wasn't a fool. If he found out, well, he'd put a stop to it, wouldn't he? Loudly, publicly. That would be inconvenient for certain people. Indeed, Miss Marple murmured. Inconvenient enough to warrant silencing him permanently? Mrs. Green nodded slowly, her face grim. It's the only explanation that fits the facts, Miss Marple. The heart attack is too neat, too convenient, especially with the garden full of deadly weeds and a window that looks like it was used as an escape route. She leaned even closer, her voice now barely audible. And I saw something myself. The night before his lordship died, late, after closing time, I was checking the backyard, making sure the bins were secure. I saw a light moving in the lane behind the inn, the one that cuts through towards the old gate in the woods. A man, tall, thin, dark coat. He was carrying something wrapped in cloth. Looked heavy. He moved fast, heading away from the hall, towards the main road. Didn't see his face, but he moved like he knew exactly where he was going, like he'd used that path before. Miss Marple's heart hammered. This was another sighting of the stranger, corroborating Lucy's and Jenkins' accounts, placing him near the scene at the critical time, carrying a bundle. Did you notice anything else, Mrs. Green? Anything distinctive about him? Or the bundle? Just the way he moved, Mrs. Green replied. Purposeful. And the bundle, it was wrapped in dark cloth, but I think I saw a corner. Something hard, shiny. Looked like, well, like polished wood, or maybe ceramic. Hard to tell in the moonlight. She frowned, concentrating. And there was something else. A few days before his lordship died, I overheard a conversation in the snug bar. Two men. One was a stranger, quiet, kept to himself, but I noticed his hands, clean, soft, not a laborer. The other, she hesitated, glancing around again, was Mr. Harding, Lord Harrington's solicitor.
Miss Marple sat up straighter. Mr. Harding, the solicitor. A man who would have intimate knowledge of Lord Harrington's affairs, including the will, the estate's finances, and potentially any historical research Lord Harrington was conducting. He was also a man who moved in professional circles, potentially with connections to railways, shipping, smuggling networks. Mr. Harding, Miss Marple prompted, what were they discussing? Couldn't hear it all, Mrs. Green admitted. They were talking low, but I caught a few phrases. The stranger said something about the shipment being delayed. Harding sounded annoyed, said delays cost money. Then the stranger mentioned quality control issues and some items damaged in transit. Harding snapped back, damaged items are unacceptable. The client expects perfection. Find a way to rectify it. Then Harding looked around sharply, and they stopped talking, paid up and left quickly. She took a breath. Shipment, quality control, damaged items, client, perfection. Doesn't sound like Tonlun the weather, does it, Miss Marple? No, it does not, Miss Marple agreed, her mind racing. Harding, discussing shipments and quality control with a stranger days before Lord Harrington's murder. It was damning circumstantial evidence. And Harding's demeanor. Was he nervous, agitated? The more than usual, Mrs. Green said. Mr. Harding's always been a bit twitchy, jumpy. But that night, he was like a cat on hot bricks. Kept looking over his shoulder, drank his whiskey too fast. And the stranger, he watched Harding, like a hawk, like he didn't trust him an inch. This was a new dimension. Harding wasn't necessarily the mastermind. He might be a middleman, a facilitator, perhaps even being manipulated or pressured by the stranger and his unseen client. But he was clearly deeply involved in the smuggling operation. Mrs. Green, Miss Marple said, her voice low and intense, Lord Harrington changed his will recently, didn't he? Cutting off Cedric, refusing Eleanor further funds.
Who would have handled that, drafted the new codicil? Mr. Harding, of course. He's been the Harrington family solicitor for 30 years. He'd be the only one. And who benefits most from Lord Harrington's death under the old will? Cedric, mainly, Mrs. Green replied promptly. Under the old will, he stood to inherit a substantial trust fund and the majority of the unentailed assets. Eleanor got the dower house and a generous allowance for Timothy. The new will, well, village gossip is that Cedric got next to nothing, and Eleanor's allowance was drastically cut. Timothy's inheritance was put in trust until he's 25, managed by Mr. Harding. Miss Marple felt a cold certainty settle in her bones. Harding had the means, access to Lord Harrington, knowledge of the estate, professional connections, the opportunity. He visited the Hall regularly, and now a powerful motive emerging. If Lord Harrington discovered Harding was using his estate for smuggling, what would he do? He'd fire him immediately as his solicitor. He'd expose him. He'd certainly change his will to ensure Harding couldn't benefit or control any family assets. Harding stood to lose everything: his position, his reputation, his income, potentially his freedom. Harding manages Timothy's trust, Miss Marple murmured, under the new will. So if Lord Harrington died before the new will was properly executed or filed, Harding would still be in control under the old terms, or could he somehow suppress the new will? Exactly, Mrs. Green breathed, understanding dawning in her eyes. If the new will disappeared or was never properly signed and witnessed, Harding would still be in charge of Cedric's inheritance under the old terms, and Timothy's trust would revert to the old arrangements too, which Harding also managed. He'd retain control over significant funds, and if Lord Harrington was silenced before he could expose the smuggling— She trailed off, the implications horrifyingly clear. It's the perfect storm for Harding. He eliminates the threat to his smuggling operation and secures his financial position by preventing the new will from taking effect. He uses the garden's poisons to make it look like natural causes, perhaps even casting suspicion on Cedric or Eleanor if questions arose. He arranges the secret train, using his connections. He hires the stranger as his operative, the one who handles the physical movement of goods. The bundle Jenkins saw him carrying from the station house, the bundle Lucy saw him carrying from the hall, the bundle Mrs. Green saw him carrying near the inn, possibly containing the stolen artifacts, or perhaps even the poison itself. Artifacts? Mrs. Green asked, puzzled.
The quality control issues and damaged items, Miss Marple explained. The coded messages Miss Finch found mentioned harvest and quality variable. Lord Harrington was researching local history and old estate maps. What if the contraband isn't rationed goods or black market food? What if it's stolen antiquities? Artifacts looted during the war or dug up illegally? Items that would be damaged if handled roughly, requiring quality control and worth a fortune to an unscrupulous client. It fits perfectly with Harding's professional world and Lord Harrington's historical interests. Harding could be using his legal knowledge and contacts to facilitate the theft and smuggling of cultural artifacts, using the remote station house as a transfer point. Mrs. Green paled. Stolen treasures on our doorstep and murder to cover it up. It's monstrous. Monstrous but logical, Miss Marple agreed. And Harding is the spider at the center of this web. He had the motive, the means, the opportunity, and the knowledge to cover his tracks. The stranger is his tool. Cedric and Eleanor are pawns. Their financial desperation and volatile emotions provide perfect red herrings, and their potential inheritance under the old will gives Harding a financial cushion, even if the smuggling falters. She paused, gathering her thoughts.
But we still lack definitive proof, Mrs. Green. Harding is careful. He wouldn't leave incriminating documents lying around. We need something tangible, something that links him directly to the murder or the smuggling operation. Mrs. Green was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then her eyes lit up. "My boy, Billy, he helps out here sometimes. Clever lad, good with his hands. Last week, Harding came in for a quick lunch, left his briefcase under his chair when he went to the facilities. Billy was clearing the table nearby. Harding dropped a small ledger, thin black leather. Billy picked it up to put it back on the chair. Harding came back, snatched it off him like it was on fire. But Billy saw the inside, just for a second. Said it wasn't accounts. Said it looked like codes or lists, letters and numbers. Didn't make sense to him, but he remembered Harding looked scared, like Billy had seen something he shouldn't. A coded ledger. It was exactly the kind of evidence Miss Marple needed. Harding's operational record. Billy didn't touch anything else, just picked up the ledger? Just that, Mrs. Green confirmed. Harding grabbed it, stuffed it back in his briefcase, mumbled something, paid quickly, and left. Billy said he'd never seen Harding move so fast, or look so white. "It's a start," Miss Marple said, a plan forming in her mind. "But Harding will be guarding that ledger now. We need more. We need to know when the next shipment is due, or where Harding keeps his records, or—" She looked directly at Mrs. Green. "Did Harding say anything else that night, to the stranger? Anything about a meeting, a location?" Mrs. Green closed her eyes, concentrating hard. "The stranger. He said something about needing to secure the next pickup. Harding, he said, the usual place. Tomorrow night, midnight, signal confirmed." Then he looked around again, and they left. Tomorrow night, midnight, the usual place, likely the derelict station house. The signal confirmed, probably the two short, one long light signal Jenkins mentioned. They're making another exchange tomorrow night. "It's a chance," Mrs. Green said, her voice filled with apprehension. "But it's dangerous, Miss Marple. These men, they've killed once. They won't hesitate again." "They won't be expecting anyone," Miss Marple said, her expression resolute. "But I won't go alone, and I won't confront them. I need proof, Mrs. Green, proof that will stand up to the authorities. That ledger would be ideal, but witnessing the exchange, seeing Harding there with the stranger and the goods, that would be compelling, especially if we could involve someone official, someone whose word would lend weight and protection." "Like the constable?" Mrs. Green suggested. "Constable Peters is a good man, but he accepted the doctor's diagnosis of heart attack too readily. He'd need overwhelming evidence to move against a respected solicitor like Harding. No, I need someone with moral authority in this village, someone whose word is beyond reproach, someone who can gather people together officially without raising suspicion." Mrs. Green's eyes widened. "The vicar, Reverend Peters." "That's precisely," Miss Marple nodded. "He can arrange a meeting, perhaps the formal reading of the will, which everyone expects. He can invite Harding, Cedric, Eleanor, the constable, the coroner, everyone concerned. And in that setting, with all the pieces in place, the testimony from Lucy, Mr. Wilkins, Miss Finch, Mr. Jenkins, you and Billy, and with Harding caught in the act tomorrow night, or the ledger secured, we can expose him." "It's a huge risk," Mrs. Green whispered, "for all of us." "Lord Harrington was murdered, Mrs. Green," Miss Marple said, her voice steely. A smuggling ring is operating on our doorstep, stealing who knows what. Harding is profiting from death and deceit. The risk is already here. We must end it." She stood up, the decision made. "Tomorrow night, at midnight, I will be near the old gate, with the vicar if I can convince him. We need to see who arrives. We need to see what is exchanged. Can you and Billy be nearby? Not close, but within sight, to bear witness?" Mrs. Green took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders. "Aye, we'll be there. Billy knows the woods around there like the back of his hand. We'll watch, and we'll be ready." She stood too, her expression grim but determined. "Be careful, Miss Marple. These men are dangerous." "Prudence is my watchword, Mrs. Green," Miss Marple assured her, though her eyes held a steely glint. "Now, I must go. I have a vicar to convince, and a trap to set." She picked up her knitting bag, her movements calm and deliberate. "Thank you, Martha. You've provided the final piece of the puzzle, the identity of the spider. Now we just need to catch him in his web." As Miss Marple stepped out of the warm, noisy inn into the cool, silent night, the harvest moon casting long...
Chapter 6. The Vicar's Courage. The drawing-room at Harrington Hall, usually a space of faded grandeur and afternoon lethargy, thrummed with an unfamiliar tension. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn against the encroaching twilight, casting the room in a pool of lamplight that seemed to isolate the occupants on an island of suppressed anxiety. Seated stiffly on a brocade sofa, Eleanor Harrington clutched a handkerchief, her knuckles white. Cedric paced restlessly near the unlit fireplace, his face pale and drawn. Constable Peters shifted uncomfortably in a wing chair, looking profoundly out of his depth. Dr. Hames, the coroner, sat bolt upright, his expression professionally neutral. And behind a large mahogany desk, the very picture of somber authority, sat Reverend Peters, his hands clasped before him, his gaze sweeping the room with quiet gravity. Standing slightly apart, near the door, observing with unnerving stillness, was Miss Jane Marple. The purpose: the official reading of Lord Harrington's last will and testament. The unspoken purpose: Miss Marple's carefully orchestrated trap. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Peters began, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel that silenced the low murmur. "Thank you for gathering at this difficult time. We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of our late friend, Lord Harrington, taken from us so suddenly." He paused, his gaze lingering for a fraction longer on Mr. Harding, the solicitor, who sat rigidly in a chair beside the desk, his briefcase clutched tightly on his lap. Harding's face was a mask of professional composure, but Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow and the way his fingers tapped nervously on the leather case. "Mr. Harding," the vicar continued, "as Lord Harrington's legal adviser, would you please proceed?" Harding cleared his throat, the sound overly loud in the quiet room. He opened his briefcase with a precise click, withdrawing a thick document sealed with red wax. "Certainly, Reverend." He began to read in a dry, monotone voice, detailing the standard bequests, sums to loyal servants, charitable donations, specific items to distant relatives. Eleanor flinched at the mention of the dower house being left to her, but with a drastically reduced maintenance allowance. Cedric stopped pacing, his face flushing with anger as Harding announced the meager annuity left to him, contingent on demonstrating responsible behavior over a period of 5 years. The air crackled with resentment. Miss Marple watched Harding closely. He was playing his part perfectly, the detached professional delivering unwelcome news. But she saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes as he observed Cedric's fury and Eleanor's despair.
He was expecting an outburst, perhaps even hoping for one to deflect attention. "It is with regret," Harding continued, his voice dropping slightly for effect, "that the primary changes Lord Harrington made in the final codicil, executed only last week, significantly alter the dispositions previously understood. The bulk of the unentailed estate, including the main house and investments, is placed in trust for young Timothy until his 25th birthday, with the Reverend Peters and myself named as co-trustees." Cedric slammed his fist onto the mantelpiece. "A week ago. That's impossible. He told me it was done months ago. He lied to me. You knew. You must have known he was cutting me off completely." "Mr. Cedric, please," Reverend Peters intervened, his voice firm but not unkind. "Emotions are running high. Let Mr. Harding finish." "Indeed, Cedric. Lord Harrington was concerned about your financial management. He felt this was necessary. As for the timing of the codicil, it was indeed finalized and witnessed last Tuesday. I have the signed document here." He patted his briefcase meaningfully. "It was the opening Miss Marple had been waiting for." She stepped forward slightly, her knitting bag held loosely in front of her. "Mr. Harding," she said, her voice gentle but carrying clearly through the room, silencing Cedric's sputtering. "That is fascinating, particularly the timing. You see, we have reason to believe Lord Harrington did not die of natural causes last Tuesday night. We believe he was murdered, and that the codicil you hold may not be the final he intended." The effect was instantaneous. Eleanor gasped. Cedric froze, his anger replaced by shock. Constable Peters sat bolt upright. Dr. Hames frowned deeply. Dr. Harding's composure cracked. He dropped the document onto the desk, his hand trembling slightly. "Murdered? Miss Marple, that is a monstrous and utterly baseless accusation. Dr. Hames certified death by heart failure." "Dr. Hames certified the apparent cause based on initial examination," Miss Marple corrected smoothly. "But evidence has come to light. Evidence I believe you are intimately aware of, Mr. Harding." She turned towards the door. "Perhaps we should hear from those who have been observing. Mr. Wilkins." The door opened, and the gardener stepped in, his weathered face grim, his eyes fixed on Harding. He carried a small sealed glass jar containing a few crushed dark leaves and a single deep blue flower petal. "Mr. Harding," Wilkins said, his voice rough but clear. "You visited the hall on Monday afternoon. You asked me specifically about the monkshood patch, said you admired the color. You lingered near it for some time. I found several stalks broken off near the base the next morning, and the window box beneath his lordship's study window, smashed, trampled, like someone climbed out in a hurry. You were the last person known to have visited his lordship privately that evening, weren't you, to discuss the final details of the codicil?" Harding's face went pale. "This is absurd. I admired the flowers, yes, many people do. I saw his lordship briefly, yes. He was perfectly well when I left. He complained of indigestion, that's all. Indigestion caused by monkshood extract in his after-dinner brandy, perhaps, or foxglove. Both cause symptoms easily misunderstood as heart failure, both readily available in that garden you showed such sudden interest in." Before Harding could formulate a denial, the door opened again. Lucy, the parlor maid, entered, her eyes wide but determined. "Mr. Harding," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "on Monday night, after you left his lordship's study, I saw you. You didn't leave the hall immediately. I was bringing fresh towels to the guest wing. I saw you go into the small conservatory off the west corridor, the one where his lordship kept his potting supplies. You were in there for several minutes. When you came out, you were carrying something small, wrapped in a cloth. You looked very nervous." Harding's composure was crumbling. His breathing became ragged. "The girl is mistaken, or lying. I went directly home." "Then perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice like ice, "you can explain why Mr. Albert Jenkins, retired signalman, saw a man matching your description. Tall, thin, wearing a dark coat and incongruously clean city shoes, running away from the hall towards the old gate around midnight that same night, carrying a bundle? And why he saw a secret train running dark stop at the derelict station house on your estate just minutes before? A train arranged to collect smuggled goods?" "Smuggled goods?" Constable Peters blurted out, looking utterly bewildered. "What on earth is going on?" "Mr. Harding is not just Lord Harrington's solicitor, Constable," Miss Marple stated, her gaze never leaving the sweating man. "He is the mastermind of a smuggling operation using that derelict station house, an operation Lord Harrington discovered, an operation Harding silenced to protect." Harding surged to his feet, his face contorted with rage and fear. "Lies! All of it! Vicious slander! Where is your proof? Where is a single shred of evidence connecting me to any of this?" The door opened for a third time. Miss Finch, the librarian, entered carrying the slim manila folder of coded newspaper clippings. She placed it on the desk beside Reverend Peters. "Proof, Mr. Harding," she said, her voice dry and precise. "Perhaps these coded messages arranging harvests, transport, and rendezvous at the old gate. Messages you discussed overheard at the Horse and Groom with a stranger, concerning shipments, quality control, and damaged items. Or perhaps Lord Harrington's borrowing records, his sudden intense interest in toxic plants, and detailed estate maps of the very area where your operation was centered. Or," she added, her eyes gleaming, "the detailed map of the old station house and surrounding tracks he requested, which you helped him locate." Harding stared at the folder, then at Miss Finch, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "And let's not forget the observation post," Mrs. Green said firmly, stepping into the room behind Miss Finch. "My inn, Mr. Harding, where you met your client's representative, where you discussed delays costing money, where Billy Green saw you drop a certain ledger." She nodded towards the door. Billy Green, a sturdy lad of 17, stepped in, his face pale but resolute. In his hands he held a thin, black leather-bound ledger. He walked straight to the desk and placed it down in front of Reverend Peters, then stepped back quickly, as if afraid it might burn him. "That's mine!" Harding shrieked, lunging for it. "Theft! Give it back!" Reverend Peters calmly placed his hand over the ledger. "I think not, Mr. Harding. Not until we understand its contents." He opened it. Inside were pages filled with columns of letters and numbers, complex codes. But on the last page, written in a hurried, spidery hand, was an entry dated the day of Lord Harrington's death. LHH becoming problem. Knows too much. Plan B initiated. Extract secured. Dispose of evidence. Midnight pickup confirmed. Below it, a scrawled addition. Plan B successful. Heart failure plausible. Secure codicil. Control trust. The room fell utterly silent. Harding stared at the page, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a dawning horror. He swayed on his feet. "Extract secured," Miss Marple said quietly, filling the suffocating silence. "The extract taken from the conservatory, witnessed by Lucy. Dispose of evidence, climbing out the window, trampling the garden, seen by Jenkins. Midnight pickup confirmed. The secret train, the bundle carried by your operative. Plan B successful.
Heart failure, plausible. Secure codicil, the one you hold, giving you control over Timothy's trust and the estate. Control trust, ensuring your financial position and continued access to facilitate your smuggling. Harding collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. A low moan escaped him. It was over. Constable Peters finally found his voice, his face grim with dawning understanding and professional outrage. "Mr. Harding, I am placing you under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Lord Harrington and conspiracy to smuggle." He moved towards the solicitor. Harding didn't resist. He looked up, his eyes wild, darting around the room as if seeking an escape that wasn't there. His gaze landed on Miss Marple, and a flicker of his old arrogance returned, mixed with desperation. You meddling old woman! You had no right! You've ruined everything. It was perfect. He was old, sick. No one would have looked twice. The antiques, the client, they paid so well. I deserved it. After years of handling his tedious affairs, his ungrateful family, I deserved to profit. He was going to expose me, ruin me. I had to stop him. He slumped forward, the confession pouring out in a torrent of self-justification and panic. He detailed the operation. Stolen antiques, looted from Europe during the chaos of war, shipped via contacts in the docks, brought to the isolated station house by the secret train Harding arranged through bribed railway officials, collected by couriers like the stranger Lucy and Jenkins had seen. He admitted researching the poisons after Lord Harrington started asking questions about the station house activity. He confessed to slipping the monkshood extract into Lord Harrington's brandy during their codicil meeting, then panicking and climbing out the window when the old man collapsed faster than anticipated, trampling the garden in his haste. He confirmed the ledger's entries, the coded messages, everything. It was a complete, damning confession. As Constable Peters led a broken and weeping Harding from the room, followed by a grim-faced Dr. Hames, the atmosphere in the drawing room shifted. The tension dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of shock, relief, and sorrow. Eleanor began to cry quietly, not for Harding, but for the monstrous betrayal and the loss of her father-in-law. Cedric stood frozen, his earlier fury replaced by a dazed comprehension of how close he had come to being implicated, perhaps even framed.
Miss Marple moved to Eleanor's side, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "It's over, my dear. Justice will be done. Lord Harrington can rest in peace now." Eleanor looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. But why? Why would he do such terrible things? "Greed, my dear," Miss Marple said softly, "and a profound lack of moral courage. He saw opportunity in chaos and took it, believing himself clever enough to escape the consequences. He underestimated the value of ordinary people noticing small things." She glanced around the room at her allies, Wilkins standing quietly by the door, Lucy offering Eleanor a fresh handkerchief, Miss Finch neatly restacking her folder, Mrs. Green murmuring reassurances to Billy. Reverend Peters approached Miss Marple, his face etched with a mixture of awe and solemnity. "Miss Marple, I am speechless. The courage, the insight to bring all these people together, to uncover such darkness. I am profoundly grateful and humbled." "It was a collective effort, Reverend," Miss Marple demurred. "Each person held a piece of the truth. My role was merely to help them see how the pieces fit. Your courage in hosting this gathering was the final, crucial step." Later, as the last of the official visitors departed,
and the hall began to settle into a quieter, though forever altered rhythm. Miss Marple found herself in the morning room. A tray with a freshly brewed pot of tea and a plate of Lady Alicia's favorite shortbread biscuits sat before her. Mrs. Groves, looking years younger and infinitely more relaxed, had just poured her a cup. "It will take time, Miss Marple," the housekeeper said, her voice thick with emotion, "to heal, to understand. But knowing the truth, knowing that monster is gone, it helps. It truly does." "It does indeed, Mrs. Groves," Miss Marple agreed, picking up her cup. She looked out the window towards the gardens, now peaceful in the fading light. The trampled flower bed beneath the study window would be restored. The derelict station house would be boarded up, its secrets exposed, the smuggling ring dismantled. Justice, slow but inexorable, had been served. She took a sip of the perfect tea. The case had been complex, woven from threads of greed, betrayal, and hidden histories. It had required the eyes of a gardener, the ears of a maid, the knowledge of a librarian, the vigilance of a signalman, the observations of an innkeeper, the courage of a vicar, and the quiet determination of an old lady who understood that evil often hid in plain sight, masked by respectability and routine. The allies had been unlikely, but their combined strength had been formidable. The shadows lengthened across the lawn. Miss Marple settled back in her chair, the familiar weight of her knitting bag resting beside her. The puzzle was solved, the village was safe, and in the quiet comfort of Harrington Hall, with the taste of tea on her tongue and the scent of shortbread biscuits in the air, Miss Jane Marple felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Another piece of darkness had been banished, not by grand gestures, but by the steady light of truth, observed by ordinary people and pieced together with patience and care. She picked up her knitting needles, the soft click-clack a soothing counterpoint to the evening stillness. Peace, fragile but precious, had returned to Chipping Claiborne.